Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. It's nighttime, I think, in Shanghai. And if Mary is with us, she was joining us from New Zealand, where I believe it's 4 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday. So really appreciate you being part of the conversation today. And it is truly a global gathering, as I said. We have members and guests from across Canada, the US, UK, Europe, Singapore, Shanghai, Tokyo, Hawaii, and as I said, New Zealand. So welcome all, and wonderful to have you here. A warm welcome also to our panel members, Julia Randell-Khan, Mark Levy, and Alistair McQueen, and to our moderator, Jeff Hamaoui. Jeff will do a more complete introduction of the panel members and the keynote speaker, Richard Leider, a little bit later. But let me just say how grateful we all are for the wonderful work each one of you is doing in this space of longevity. And I would encourage all our community members to get to know the panelists and the work that they're doing across the globe. Now, I've met many of you already, but those of you who are new to our community, a few words about What's Next. What's Next is a social venture that we started 3 years ago. And our mission is to empower transitioners, whom we define as mid to late career individuals and entrepreneurs, lead engaged and purposeful lives. We're in the process of developing a community-based digital platform that will offer transitioners the opportunity for self-discovery and then to support them with tools and resources as they develop and execute their self-designed playbook for this next phase of life. And all of this, hopefully within a diverse, inclusive, and supportive community, as we are seeing here today. So today's session is actually a follow-up to the 5 global events we hosted this past summer, where transitioners shared with us and with each other their lived experiences of this phase of life. Today's session is therefore around the practical aspects of midlife transitions and how this next phase of life can be lived with intent, vigor, and purpose. So let's get started. And I'd like to introduce you to my dear friend and guide for this morning, Jeff Hamaoui. Jeff is the founding partner and head of education and innovation at the Modern Elder Academy. Prior to joining MEA, Jeff worked in sustainability and innovation and was a partner at Second Muse, a social impact and innovation company. Jeff, by the way, has just returned from a month-long sabbatical in Puglia, so we might have to be careful that he doesn't slip into some Italian from time to time.
I won't slip into Italian, but I'll do my best to keep the conversation flowing in whatever language we choose. You know, I wonder, guys, if we go through a set of individual introductions. I know that I've got all the notes. I can tell you about Alistair and his being the head of savings and retirement at Aviva. But Alistair, I'd much rather hear it from your mouth. How did you arrive here? In terms of being, you know, in the aging insurance business? How did you get here?
That's a short question, that's a long answer. But first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I've been in many of these debates about longevity and aging and transitioners within my own walls in the United Kingdom, which is where I'm speaking from. I think this is one of the first I've been that has been international, and it's wonderful. I've already met somebody from South Africa, somebody from Germany, somebody from Canada. And the fact that this is a global challenge and a global issue just makes it even more significant and motivating for me. But how did I end up here? Well, my academic background is in economics, and that led me to Aviva, which is the UK's largest insurer, the world's oldest insurer, from 1696, when we were born as a company, celebrating our 325th birthday last week, actually. And within that, the walls of that company, many products I migrated towards the pensions product, which played to my economic background and training. And I approached it with some caution, thinking this is going to be grey, this is going to be dull, this is for quote unquote old people. But actually, it really opened my eyes to a transition that's happening around the world and a transformation that's happening around the world. And that's the great news of living longer. We all know the statistics about living longer, and it's wonderful. But the great societal challenges that brings with it, if we are to make the most of these extra years on the planet. And in short, Aviva, my employer, recognized there's two levers that most of us can pull to make sure we can thrive in our later life. One is we can save more. And Aviva was already doing lots of good stuff around helping millions of people save more. And the second lever is you can contribute for longer. And we as an employer felt, you know what, we're not doing nearly enough to help people contribute more and work longer should they choose to do so. And that's the second part of that agenda. So it was that, how can we help people thrive throughout their longer later lives, not only by saving more, but by contributing longer. And that's brought me to this debate, and it's brought me here today, and I'm delighted to be part of it.
It's a good bridge, Alistair. Stanford and the head of the DCI there came up with these sort of 3 pillars in terms of what makes people thrive during their midlife. And one was well-being, just physical and financial, so saving more. One was purpose, which is, I guess, contribution, right? And then the third, which is what we're doing here all together, is community. So being in community. And I raised that because Julia, you were part of that program, weren't you?
That's
and
right.
It kind of inculcated you into all of this discussion.
That's right. Yes. No, I had the fortune to go to the Stanford program, which is a 1-year program for really, it's a sort of midlife transition program. Because I was coming out of sort of 30 plus years in the legal field, and I transitioned really from law to longevity, and now very much as a social entrepreneur in this area. But the Stanford program was really kind of anchoring because it enabled me to sort of fast track my thinking. And, you know, I became a student again. You know, I was in class with 18-year-olds. It was really intergenerational learning. And, you know, we're talking about today about this sort of purposeful longer life, but learning, I think, you know, is central to this. And so my kind of story is I really had to kind of work it out myself. There was no kind of what next community to dip into about 8 years ago. And so when I decided to draw a line under my sort of international legal career, I had to work it out myself. I did some thinking about it before I left because, you know, I felt that I needed to do a bit of planning. And then it was a very sort of serendipitous kind of journey. You know, I set up a group of women in transition to explore sort of change at this particular point in life. Then the Stanford program, then working at the Stanford Center on Longevity on the New Map of Life program, finding the Encore organization, finding Modern Elder, as you know, Jeff, I came to the Modern Elder Academy. So, and then back to the UK as really sort of an entrepreneur in this space in terms of bringing one of the Encore programs to the UK and then setting up the Purpose Exchange just recently. So it's really been, I think, quite a sort of connected but serendipitous experience of as I've sort of built my sort of next phase of life, really. And as again, Julia, as Alistair, delighted to be here.
Before we move on to Mark, there's going to be people on this line who are thinking about their purpose. I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about on this call. And with some degree of anxiety in terms of like, gosh, maybe they left their job last week and they still haven't found their next purpose. Can you give us a sense of the time of that journey? How long did it take you from becoming kind of successful lawyer to becoming aging entrepreneur? Not that you are aging, but an entrepreneur in the aging space.
We're all aging, Jeff. It takes time. I mean, I would say it took me probably 3 or 4 years to kind of land in a place where I felt, you know, I feel good here. So, you know, transition does take time. And I think I'm sure everybody on this call is thinking about it from a personal perspective, but it's a very unique phase of life, isn't it? I mean, it's been called the third quarter, it's been called middle essence, but there's something I think quite unique going on. It's this kind of tension between sort of slowing down, but also speeding up, this tension between sort of pausing, but also restraint, urgency, but also patience. It's Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot from Harvard has written beautifully, I think, about this phase of life. And if anyone's not familiar with her work, I'd really encourage you to have a read of it. But I think there's a lot of change going on. You know, emotional, physical, work, finance, relationships. There's a lot coming at us, which can create its own energy, but also it's a very fluid time. And so I think it's important to pause and to be able to sort of go at a pace at this point in life where, you know, you can absorb all of that and reflect on it. So having this kind of community, you know, again, from an international perspective, I think is just wonderful to be able to share insights, experience, and have people, a sort of cohort of people around you who can experience it in a similar way and exchange ideas and experiences. Does that kind of answer the question, Jeff?
Yeah, it does. And I think the salient point, the sort of the key point, is it took 4 years just to find your feet. So as we're all thinking about purpose, there's often this anxiety to find something immediate, right? You move from one thing to the next, and the sense of like, gosh, can I really be without purpose and the attendant identity for 3 or 4 years? And I think your answer is solidly yes. You have to take the time to explore and find the next thing, right? So that you can become something different yourself.
That's right. That's right.
Mark Levy. Mark and I have known each other for several years. He was actually in the second week of the Modern Elder Academy. He came down to our beta program and has since come down several times and has become part of my life. He is a friend of mine. Mark, you've got all kinds of experience in this world in terms of how to kind of give people purpose and how to kind of help align them. Tell us a little bit about how you arrived on this call beyond being friends with most of us.
Sure. That's a hard question to answer without taking all 30 minutes. I would say—
I'll give you one.
Okay. I was raised by a very caring set of parents who early on had me thinking about giving back. I went to a summer camp where there was something called the Scholarship Fund, where we were asked on monumental moments in our lives to contribute to help underprivileged kids go to camp. In college, I spent some time with a nonprofit at Pikes Peak Legal Services. And then when I started my career, I joined really big-hearted companies like Levi's and Gap, and saw how the Haas family and the Fisher family really encouraged their employees to give back, how to leverage their talents, and the importance of the role that a company plays in the world beyond making money or selling products. And so I think as I evolved as a human and as a HR leader, I saw the importance of social impact. And I wanted to see how I could incorporate that into my role. And so when I got to Airbnb, Brian Chesky, the CEO, basically said, "I don't know what HR is, but everything I've heard about, I don't like. Can we reinvent it?" And so I said, "Sure." So we came up with a new name, Employee Experience, and we came up with a broader remit, which included volunteerism, social impact. And we ended up incorporating a lot of different ways in which our employees were giving back, or we were not having holiday parties. Instead, we were all going out and volunteering. We recognized years of service through a fund that the company contributed to, so employees could give to nonprofits, et cetera. And then even after I left, I was involved in helping them to think through their foundation and worked with the Founders Pledge to encourage our alumni and our employees to give back a certain dollar amount or percentage of the money that we would get at IPO to be able to continue this idea of giving back. And so I think it's just something that's evolved through my life, and I figured out how to bring it in from personal to professional and continue to do so. So my consulting that I've done after leaving Airbnb, I've decided to just focus on either underestimated founders or companies that are working on something towards social good.
Fantastic. Mark, there's a sort of a meme out there that there is something generational about impact and purpose at work. That you know, younger, perhaps millennials, are more interested in impact and purpose than people in older age. Do you find that? Have you found that to be true in your experience?
Yes. I mean, when I was at Gap Inc., for example, even though you know it was an interesting brand at the time, but I think people really gravitated. The younger, when we were doing college recruiting, people gravitated towards us because we had a very, very defined and robust way of volunteerism, and we found that that's why a lot of people joined. And in fact, I was on the Gap Foundation board of directors, and we had this thing called Community Corps, where we recognized our strongest volunteers and we took them on trips, one to New Orleans, one to Guatemala with Habitat for Humanity, and we thanked them by giving them another volunteer activity. And when I hosted a dinner one night in Atitlan, Guatemala, people said that's why they were at the company, not because they love the clothes or they loved customer service, but they wanted to work for a company that was giving them the opportunity to give back in what was important to them and to recognize them for that. So yes, I think there is something to be said about that, and a lot of people are choosing their company based on certainly their mission and their values and what they stand for, or how they've showed up through the racial inequality challenges, how they've showed up relative to politics or abortion or anything like that. People are certainly, the younger people are making their choices of where they work and how much they put into it based on what they believe is the ability to give back or to have purpose or stand for the right things.
Julia, I would be fascinated to know if that was consistent for your findings at DCI. I'm guessing you were with a cohort of people. What were they exploring? Were they looking at purpose, or what did you find?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, people are at a point in their life where, you know, they were fortunate to be able to step back, and the whole sort of ethos of the DCI program is all about social impact and thinking about purpose, but from a personal, but also what you're contributing, as Mark was saying, what you're giving back. And so people were, you know, the cohort was sort of encouraged to kind of find your own path in terms of seeds of ideas that maybe you had, you know, many years ago. So one colleague, for example, I think she was in management consulting, and she's ended up working on, you know, how you counteract methane gas by what you feed to cows, for example. And she's actually started a startup, I think, based in Hawaii. So it's because you were in an environment of learning at a place like Stanford, where you've got so many different experts who you can work with. You're able to kind of follow your instinct in terms of what would make sense for you, and you arrive not really knowing, and then it kind of unfolds as you're there in that kind of very you know, challenging but also very rich environment, and it's the kind of environment where you can just go and, you know, sit down and have a coffee with a Nobel Prize winner, for example. I mean, you've got access to such expertise, which is a unique environment, but I think it actually plays out wherever you are in terms of how you're thinking about your learning at this point in life. But I think if you've got a focus of how you are contributing, you know, because Mark was saying, which was certainly kind of the core ethos of the program, I think you can then, you know, you let ideas flow and you go down different avenues. And obviously, you know, a place like, you know, the West Coast is full of, you know, sort of the startup entrepreneurial mentality. So that creates its own energy. And you find that you can, you know, because we were all people who've had quite long careers in different fields, you actually can sort of cross network and cross fertilize. You know, you need to go and speak to so-and-so. So you open up you know, your own sort of community to people more widely. But in fact, what you found is that people weren't really constrained by who they were. They were looking about the future, and you didn't really kind of, you know, you didn't really talk that much about the history. It was all about the looking forward and what you were going to be doing next.
What's next?
What's next? Exactly. All roads leads to what next?
I just want to dip back into this word that you've now used twice, which is learning. So obviously this is pretty pivotal for you in terms of continuing to grow and finding purpose in the next stage of your life. What role does learning play in finding purpose for you?
I would say it's a variety of things, but for me, it was very much about being open to new ideas, and the actual sort of physical and in a way cognitive benefit that I was feeling. I felt my brain was actually fizzing. You know, I could feel it. You know, the cells were firing, and I could really feel it. And I think being able to put yourself, whether it's through, you know, night courses or more intensive programs like that, there are lots of ways at this stage in life to actually test out your enthusiasm to learn, whether it's trying out, you know, new sort of creative talents or writing talents or business talents. So I think learning is about sort of learning how to be open and being open to going down avenues that you may not have gone before and seeing where it leads. So I think that for me is at the core of it. But and the research shows, you know, that people who are, you know, engaged socially, intellectually, you know, do have a longer, more healthy life. I mean, the research from various organizations shows that. So I think it does play out. And I'm sure people on the call today probably have got lots of examples of where that's playing out for people individually.
Having an open mindset and a generative mindset around aging can add up to 7 years to your life, is what the research shows, which is better than quitting smoking, which is what I'm thinking about. I really want to put a pin in this. I want to pin this thought because I think it's a critical thought around learning. And this idea that if we're not open, I love a lot of what you're saying, Julia, in terms of the exploration and that openness. If we're not open to that learning in this phase of our lives, if we're closed and we feel like we know who we are, what we do, how we do it, there's only one way to go, and that's backwards into the purposes and the things that we already understand. So the reason I'm focusing on learning is this idea that if you do not want to regress and kind of keep doing what you were doing, you have to learn and progress to move into something new, which kind of means being open to changing yourself, right? So I really love that you brought that, and in that process comes this energy, right? It's the energy of exploration, energy of finding yourself. Alistair, I kind of want to ask you that question, the same kind of question for you personally, but also for you as an employer. You know, how do you help people in later life find purpose? You didn't use the word purpose, but contribution.
Sure. I mean, I think it's amazing to hear Mark and Julia talking about having access to inspirational people, I'm sure, like the chief executive of Airbnb or Nobel Prize winners. And that's a rare privilege to have that access. I'm representing, I think, as an employer, a population of people who are transitioners without that gift and that privilege of having that access. And I think you mentioned the word mindset, Jeff, and I think that is a really, really important mindset here. And that is a mindset in two areas: the mindset of the individual and the mindset of the employer. In terms of the individual, in my organization, there's a mindset that is not written down anywhere, but a mindset that says, you know what, my career development ends when I get to 50. That would be illegal for Aviva to write that down anywhere in the UK. But there's a mindset that says if there's a development program, then it's for people younger than me. And that's a a limiting mindset that must be challenged. And that mindset challenge also sits with the employer as well. We have examples, many examples of managers approaching a 55-year-old or a 52-year-old or a 62-year-old coming to their end of year review, and the manager is saying, this is your end of year review, you're 52. Well, this won't take long, will it? Sort of sending the message that their career is behind them. And that is an incredibly limiting mindset. So the first challenge that we have got in our organization, and I think in many large organizations, is to challenge that out of date mindset that age defines when learning begins and when learning ends. And so we really have to shake that tree, and we have got programs to try primarily to shake that tree, both for the employer and the manager, to stop looking past your 55-year-olds and your 60-year-olds who have got all the experience that you can't buy, but have all the experience that gets the organization working. And also shaking up the 55-year-old to say, do you know what? All of this resource and development and investment is every bit as much there for you as it is for the 18-year-old or the 19-year-old. And so, yes, we can put in place all the policies, and yes, we can put in place all the rules. And that's the relatively easy bit. The hard bit is shaking up, in my case, as I said, a 325-year-old organization with an incredibly deeply ingrained culture that is out of date, that says once you get to 50, that's it, it's your wind down time now, both in the mindset of the employer and in the mindset of the individual. That's incredibly damaging for the individual, and it's incredibly damaging for an organization. And the winning organizations are the ones that are erasing that line and saying it doesn't matter what your birth certificate says, it's what your attitude is. And that's where the winning organizations will be in the future.
I agree. There's an elasticity between biology and society, right? In 1905, our expected lifespan was about 55 years old. And now I think many of us can expect to live up to around 85. I know we have a global audience, so those numbers vary according to where you are, but that's essentially a doubling of midlife. And we have no social infrastructure to accommodate that doubling of midlife. And so you're absolutely right. People think of 50, 55 institutionally, if not if not personally, as the wind down, whereas actually it's the midpoint. And to flush away all of that emotional intelligence, that EQ that people bring to the table, that experience and wisdom, seems like
I think again, I think all large employers, you'll read the report and accounts and they'll all say our people are our most valuable asset.
Yeah.
And then you probably should put a little asterisk next to that. Asterisk, unless you're over 50, in which case we don't care about you anymore. I mean, and that has been the reality, and that is madness. Because as I say, this is the population that knows how life works, and also increasingly represent the customer base that they're serving. Yet still, there's a little asterisk next to that statement that says our people are our most valuable asset. Asterisk, unless you're over 50.
Yeah. Mark, as someone who's sort of explored this sort of new domain of employee experience as opposed to HR, and is looking at a workforce that is increasingly older, right? Again, the mathematics show that the workforce will be getting older. How do you work with people in midlife in the workplace to help connect them to new values, to new purposes? Do you have some seeds of ideas? Do you have some thoughts?
I think the inspiration that I've seen has been through companies really both two things. One is finding a way to figure out how they can operate and connect to the communities in which they serve, and to stand for something, not for everything. I mean, but to do right, but to find something that is meaningful to them. So at Airbnb, we were about creating a world where anyone could belong anywhere. So we were heavily into trying to find ways to try and the enemy of Airbnb was a stranger. So we tried to figure out how to have people understand the different cultures and get along, and diversity. We had a pledge at Airbnb that employees and hosts and guests all had to take, an anti-discrimination pledge. So I think the one thing is where a company can really double down on what's important, and then attract people who are interested in that and want to further that. At Allbirds, where I worked for less than a year, it was all around sustainability, the sustainable materials, and getting to a place where we were more focused on what we were doing to the planet and that. I'd say the second thing is to give people the opportunity. At Airbnb, we introduced 4 hours of paid time off for volunteering a month, and then wanted them to figure out how they gave back to something that was important to them, but also how they leveraged the skills and abilities that they had acquired. And so that really came from the way both Gap and Levi's wanted people to get out there. Our recruiters were helping underprivileged youth to figure out how to get a job, how to prepare for an interview, how to get into the workforce. And we had our marketing team helping nonprofits to figure out how to do a better job of fundraising or getting people interested in contributing or volunteering. So there's different ways that I think that you can leverage what you either love or what you do and harness that towards what's important to you. And that's like the on-ramp to then figuring out how you might spend some of your time giving back in what you give to the what your superpower is, and there's kind of that marriage there. And that's how I would say I think people can start to figure out what might be next for them.
I hate to do this to us all because we're literally just starting the conversation. I feel we haven't had enough time to go deep. But Alistair and Mark, I get the sense that what we're saying as employers, as you're looking at employing people, is that you have to have an age-free mindset, right? Just engage the people that you're working with at every level with opportunities to engage, to find purpose, to realign to those things. And Julia, I think as individuals, perhaps the key message that we explored was take time to learn, time to sort of breathe into whatever is going to come next for you without necessarily committing. And that's certainly our experience at the Modern Elder Academy, is that people need to take the time, whether it's a year or 2 years or 3 years, to really find out what's coming next, what their purpose is coming next. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a wonderful discussion with each other and made some good connections. It is always where the richness is found in these events. So it is my pleasure, my real pleasure actually, to introduce Richard Leider. Richard is so ridiculously accomplished in so many ways, and just when you think you understand how accomplished he is, something new comes up. He's set up his organization called Inventure, the Purpose Company, and is one of the top 5 most respected coaches in the world. In addition, he has written 11 books, several best-selling books, including The Power of Purpose and Repacking Your Bags. And who do you want to be when you grow old? So Richard is one of those people. And just as we were getting on the call, he was telling me and reminding me about all his guided walking tours in Africa that he leads. So as you look at the background, you will see that Richard is sort of peppered with all kinds of incredible mementos from his life, walking and engaging with elders all through Africa. So it is our distinct pleasure to welcome Richard to give us a short discussion on purpose. Richard.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I have a few slides here that I want to use that Liz is going to put up here. And but life on purpose. I've been a student of life on purpose now for almost 5 decades. The future belongs to the learners, not the knowers. So I'm still a learner, and I want to share a little bit about what I know about purpose. And I'm on a book tour right now with that book, Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old? The Path of Purposeful Aging. And purpose is both a path and a practice, the way that I hold it. And it also, I use the language of unlocking the power of purpose, as opposed to discovering or finding it out there. It's unlocking it in here. And I want to start by saying that purpose is basically fundamental. It's not a luxury. It's fundamental to health, to healing, to happiness, and it's also fundamental to longevity. And you know, every new idea goes through several phases, and the 3 phases that Schopenhauer, the philosopher, said: first of all, ridicule, then violent opposition, and then self-evident. I've been through all 3 phases, and I'm in the self-evident phase now, where both science and faith agree that purpose is fundamental. And it's fundamental to well-being and resilience in times of pandemic and other adversities in life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about unlocking the power of purpose here for a few moments. And I want to say that I talk also about purpose with a big P and purpose with a little p. Purpose with a big P is kind of like noble purpose. I have to have a cause. I have to have a nonprofit to volunteer for. I have to have something that's larger than life in many ways. And we often read about and extol the virtues of big P purpose people like Nelson Mandela or others. And little p purpose, though, hopefully you're giving a sigh of relief now. Little p purpose is what you do on a day-to-day basis. It's what you do with the 1,440 purpose moments in a day, and how you unlock and make a difference in one person's life every single day. So let's talk about this existential question that's come up during the pandemic. What on earth am I here for? This is what's come up for so many people during, you know, I'm on a virtual book tour now, and I've done a little bit of live, but mostly virtual. And I find so many people are willing and able and wanting, hungering for diving deeply into this question, this existential question. Well, what on earth am I here for? If I could die, or it's a short life, or if this is the possibilities now, I'm going to do what I want to do and need to do in my life. And so many people feel like they've been living what I call a default life. They didn't actually choose their life until maybe they got to midlife and they had a crisis, or that something happened along the way with health, relationships, work, finances that caused them to step back and reflect and look in the rearview mirror and say, did I choose this? And would I re-choose it now in certain ways? So the default life is one that I ask you, are you living a default life? Are you living a life? Did you choose your career, or did it choose you? As a career psychologist, I found so many people that their work actually chose them. And then they get to a certain point in life and they say, well, how can I re-choose? Now I have a mortgage, or I have kids, or I have this or that. How do I really go about that? And so they start to look at then, well, what is the good life? Rather than looking in the rearview mirror, let's look in the windshield. What is the good life looking ahead? And so that's what I want to look at here is first of all, what is the good life? My philosophy professor colleague, David Shapiro, and I wrote a book called Repacking Your Bags, Lighten Your Load for the Good Life. And we define the good life in this way. He went all the way back to the Stoics and philosophers and others. And, I did interviews with people who are living their lives today. And the 4 factors in the good life are these. In addition to health and money, it's living in the place you love, with the people you love, doing the work you love with purpose. So let me review: place, people, right work, and purpose. Are you living in the place you love, with the people you love, doing the work you love on purpose? And as you look in the rear view mirror and the windshield, there's all this stuff that's coming up all the time in the media today about the great resignation. I call it the great reimagining, because what's happening is so many people are reimagining, looking at whether they're living the default life and looking at reimagining what is the good life and how can I live it. And so let me do a spoiler alert right now. So spoiler alert, Jeff, spoiler alert is, what are you here on earth for? It's to serve, to be of service. And so I want to give you a purpose right now, a default purpose, so that you can't get off this call without having a purpose, because here's the default purpose. It's only 2 words. It's grow and give. That's it. The universal study of purpose among many, many science and faith. If you get up in the morning with the why question, what am I here on earth for? Why am I here? It's to grow and give. So jot down, grow and give, and I'm going to come back with a practice on that in a minute. But I believe if you don't believe that it's to be of service, ultimately, what on earth am I here for? Then what is the answer to that question for you? And I think that's why Mebs and this team has put this together to help us to have the conversation about that. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into that. Is your calling? Another word for purpose is calling. And I met, when I got out of graduate school, back when dinosaurs were roaming the earth in counseling psychology, I spent a week with a man named Viktor Frankl. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was in concentration camp. His whole family was killed, including his pregnant wife, Tilly. He survived. He's a neurologist, psychiatrist in Vienna, Austria, teaching people about logotherapy, doctors and residents about meaning therapy, logotherapy. He was liberated from Auschwitz. He weighed 87 pounds. He came back to Vienna, Austria. He healed and he wrote the book, Man's Search for Meaning, in 9 days. And he said, the last of the human freedoms is choice. It's to choose what you want your next moment and your life to be about, regardless of the adversities. And I can't imagine an adversity like a concentration camp, but that was his. So when I was with him, he drew this model that you see here on the board. And he drew the horizontal line is the line of success, from high success on the right to low success on the left. The vertical line that he bisected this with is from fulfillment at the top to despair at the bottom. So you can see the typical model here. He said the lower left quadrant is job. Do you have a job? Have you ever had a job? It's one that's not necessarily high in success financially or outwardly, and not success and fulfillment, but it pays the bills. And sometimes that's the default choice that we make. And sometimes we stick with that default choice. The next one is career. He said, sometimes we're moving up the ladder of success, but the ladder is not necessarily against the right wall. He said, many people burn out, rust out, and suffer from EV, existential vacuum. And in that lower right-hand box. And then he said the upper left-hand box is a mission. Sometimes we have a mission. We're not making a lot of the outer success, but we're certainly making it in the inner fulfillment. And then finally, he talked about the one I want to talk with you about, and that's calling, the upper right. Calling is the inner urge to give your gifts away. It's the inner word, it's success with fulfillment. We want to succeed and live a good life in the place we want, with the people we want, doing the work we want with purpose. And it's that inner urge to give our gift away that is calling. So one of life's most dangerous questions is this: what do you do? You ever, we're coming up on the holidays, you're going to be running into people who say, well, what do you do? That's a dangerous question because it puts you in a box. You are not what you do. You are who you bring to what you do, regardless of whether that's a job, career, mission, or calling. There's an old adage that said, if you are what you do, when you don't, you aren't. If you are what you do, when you don't, you aren't. And that's what happens often in midlife and later life and retirement. We aren't, and we have to reimagine and look at ourselves in new ways. And as Frankl said, don't ask, what is my calling, or even what is my purpose? Ask this: what is life asking of me now? What is life asking of me now in this situation? And before he came out with Man's Search for Meaning, he actually gave some lectures for several months after he'd healed. And the bottom line of the lectures, it just came out in 2019 for the first time in English, in a book with this title: Say Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. That was Frankl's message: say yes to life in spite of everything. Calling puts some teeth into how to say yes to life and why to say yes to life. So what is life asking of you now? So uncover your calling is the next slide. I call it the napkin test. I call it actually the Got a Minute School of Coaching, because in many ways people say, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time for this. Got a minute, Richard? You're supposedly a good coach. Got a minute? Can you tell me what I should do with the rest of my life? And I say, well, if you only got a minute, take out a napkin and write down this formula. This is the formula for unlocking the power of purpose, in my humble estimation, that I would like to share with you and ask you to do. It's called the napkin test. So assume you have a napkin in front of you, write down G plus P plus V equals C. Gifts plus passions plus values equals calling. Are you using your gifts? Regardless, purpose is age agnostic. Young people, midlife people, older people, we all have, from cradle to grave, the hunger to discern, unlock, and express our calling. So gifts are those things that you love to do. A gift has 4 characteristics to it. Number 1, it is something you love to do and your hand turns to naturally. Secondly, others observe you loving to do it and doing it rather effortlessly and perhaps superbly. Third, a gift is something that you can't recall learning. That's a really big one. How many of you, a show of hands, have brothers and sisters? Are your brothers and sisters' gifts the same as yours? Nope, not for the most part. There's some overlap, of course. Same family, same history, perhaps, in certain ways. Different gifts differing. And fourth, so we can't recall learning it. As number 3, we can't recall learning it. And as a result, we often underplay it, underestimate it, don't give it value because we don't have a degree in it. We don't have a certificate in it. We don't have an endorsement in it, but it's something we love to do and we do effortlessly and naturally. I listen for a living. One of my gifts is, when I'm really on, and I'm not always on, is listening to what's not said, listening to what's felt behind the conversation in certain ways. That's a gift. I've been doing it since I was little. What about you? What's a gift that you can? It's also one you love practicing and learning more about, and perhaps sharing your learnings with others. So gifts, what are your gifts? And are you using them on things you feel passionate or purposeful about? When you get up in the morning, if you're using your most enjoyed gifts on something you really care deeply about or you're curious about, then that's part of what will help you discern your calling or your purpose. And the third thing is values. Another word for values in this formula is voice. It's, do you work in a place, or are you in a place that you have a voice in matters? That's the #1 knockout factor in most career research. People may have a good job description and a great job, but where they work and who they work with is not working for them. And so they leave to do their own thing or do that thing somewhere else where they do have a voice in matters. That's a big part of the Great Resignation. People yearn to use their gifts on things that matter in environments that really are healthy for them, where there's really a good fit and they have a voice in matters. And when you put it all together, it's what the Csikszentmihalyi, who just died recently, talked about what he called flow. It's that when you lose all track of time and you're so engaged that you really love what you're doing and you want to do it again and again. So are you using your gifts on things that you feel passionate about in environments that fit your values from cradle to grave, age agnostic, as I said. So the napkin test shown here is why do we need to do this? Here's why. This took me a while to figure out and probably clear to you, but it's this. Action precedes clarity. The way you unlock your power of purpose is through practice. You practice by getting up every day and doing something. And through that practice, you get clarity about what really matters to you, as opposed to going off and just reflecting. That's okay, that's good. But action precedes clarity. So I gave you a purpose before, grow and give. And what I'm asking you to do here is to put that grow and give on a Post-it and put that on your mirror. And tomorrow morning, when you get up, ask yourself, how am I going to grow and give today? There are so many moments in a day. It can be just one moment, 1 minute in a doorway, or if it's not live on the phone or through a Zoom or through anything where you really feel like you can make a difference. Living purposefully, life on purpose, is about making a difference in one person's life every single day. Full stop, no exceptions. That's my point of view on that. My purpose with a big P is to help people unlock the power of purpose. My purpose with a little p is to unlock help one person every single day, is to make a difference in one person's life every single day by listening, by just showing up, by being present, by listening, maybe asking a good question. What about you? What would be your big purpose, little purpose? So I want to conclude here by talking about following your thread. Following your thread. As you see here, there's a needle in a haystack. Well, I met a fellow named William Stafford. I was on the board of Grey Wolf Press, which is one of the largest publishers of poetry in the US. And on the board of William Stafford, you may know about him, but he wrote a poem a day for 30 years. Can you imagine his napkin test? He wrote a poem a day for 30 years. And when asked at a board meeting, how could you write a poem a day for 30 years? He smiled and turned to the board and he said, simple, lower your expectations. He got up every day to write. He didn't get up every day to write a best-selling poem, even though he wrote, many, many tomes of best-selling poems. What would you get up to write on a day, not to write, to do on a day-to-day basis? But one poem summarizes what I'm trying to share here. And this poem from William Stafford, I'm going to read, it's short. It's called The Way It Is. William Stafford, he said, there's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. I think in my message is you don't ever let go of the small p, purpose, throughout your life. Regardless of the adversities in life, you hold on to your purpose, to the thread. And as Stafford and others say, don't forget you're going to die. And as the Saint Benedictine said, keep death daily before you. Keep death daily before you. I do that. And that's part of what the pandemic did. It kept death daily before, and still does before, many people. As a result of that, they look for the thread and holding on or redefining what their thread is as they move forward. So final slide here is unlock the power of purpose. As I said, purpose is age agnostic, and that there are 1,440 purpose moments in a day for you to make choices, to make a difference in one life today. And finally, this is a model of life that shows that, look at the up curve. Look at what we're doing here today, what MEA and Jeff are doing. It's about happiness and fulfillment and making a difference in the second half or the later part of life, but it's throughout our whole life. As the American essayist E.B. White said this, "I arise in the morning, torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day." Well, with all due respect to E.B. White, we want to both save and savor the world. And that demands sometimes a big P, but mostly it demands a little p.
We now have the pleasure of being with all of our panelists and having a discussion with them. So this is the time when you can start to either share something that came up in your discussion, and maybe one of the panelists can respond to that, or indeed you can ask one of the panelists a direct question. So we have at the top of our screen, Richard, Julia, Alistair, and Mark, and obviously myself as well. So who wants to kick it off? Did anyone have a big aha in their discussion that they'd love to share or like to share? You know what we can do is.
Well, can I kick off? Can I kick off? Is that allowed, Jeff?
Yeah, Alistair. Yeah, as you do that, if you raise a hand, so if you go to the reactions button in the middle of your screen, it's actually middle right of your screen, there's a little happy face with the word reactions underneath. Hit that, and underneath is just above that will be the raise hand button. So if you raise your hand, we will then line up some questions as well. But Alistair, take it away.
Well, I think, first of all, Richard, there was a huge ovation from our little group back to you for your presentation. So we all took a huge amount of inspiration from it. There was lots of points of debate. One was that the subject of the great resignation, that phrase that you used. And the little debate that said, is that a cup half full view of what's been going on for the last 18 months? You know, some people may not have been pausing and seeking purpose and moving on. I said, maybe some people are cynical about their opportunities, but somebody else pushed back and said it's not cynicism, it's rigidity that some people have at this point in life. And I think that I love that word. It's some people are maybe stuck or rigid in where they are, and the challenge is how we release them from that rigidity. So that was rigidity was one of the words. Pushing back on rigidity was something that we discussed.
Yeah, sometimes
talk a lot in our work. Go ahead,
sometimes
Richard.
we're pushed by pain, and sometimes we're pulled by possibilities, and sometimes we're just stuck. So I find oftentimes we're pushed by pain. We need to make these moves, or have these discussions and look in the windshield, and sometimes we're pulled by possibilities. So everybody's an experiment of one.
It's worth reading Carol Dweck's work in this area and looking at the sort of the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset. I think it's incredibly pertinent to our state in life. It's something that we talk a lot about at the Academy. Lisa Burnage, Burn Age, which seems incredibly appropriate. Okay, if you unmute yourself, bottom
left.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeff. Actually, it's my real name. I was born with that name.
Okay.
Yeah. I call it Burn Ageism, actually. We had a great chat, Dawn and Mary, in our last little group about the big P and little p. And Mary mentioned something very interesting about having an unbucket list to let go of your little P's that may not be serving you anymore. And both Dawn and it was just, so it was almost like imagining there's the bucket list to do, but there's all the bucket list to undo. And that it's also about letting go of the P's which may not be as relevant to us anymore. Mm-hmm. That was a great takeaway. Thanks, Mary.
Julie, I saw you nodding along with that. Did you have a reaction to that?
No, I think it's so true, Lisa, really. It's there is a kind of shedding, I think, that goes on, and it happens sort of instinctively. It's not a a preconceived idea, but it does happen naturally, I think. The things that did seem to be important are less important. But it's only by, I think, sort of being observant to that, and that you realize that actually you have shifted. But it happens in little sort of micro moments, I think. When you reflect back over a period of time, you realize that actually, I mean, certainly for me, I was a lawyer and everything was planned and I had to be, knowing what I was doing when, but actually now I can just go with the flow much better. And that's really freeing. And it gives you a great sense of freedom. So that was my experience of the shedding of past behavior and past expectations of myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my lessons on that is, to hitchhike on Julia's, no is a complete sentence. And learning to say no with kindness and compassion, but the answer is no. I'm not going to try. I'm not coming, or I'm not doing this, or whatever. For many of us, we want to be nice, and Minnesota nice, they call it where I am here, but no is something I think we need to learn to respect.
Yeah, I mean, at the Modern Elder Academy, one of the big things that they talk about is, as we age, is that the modern elder is an editor, and you have to really get to focus.
That's right. We even have rituals around it, right, Mark, where we're just trying to get people to edit away the things that no longer serve them. But I love the unbucket list. The crude human in me wants to name it the something else list, but let us move on. Dawn Van Dam.
Hi there.
Some killer names, killer question and names.
Thank you. My question is for all of the panelists, but it builds off of Richard's presentation, so maybe you can give your thoughts first. I'm imagining that you all kind of come in contact with either direct opportunities to coach, let's call it older people, and then very young people, maybe at the beginning of their careers or their lives. And when you're trying to get them to find things like purpose, like Richard talked about, do you find that either group is easier to work with, or are there certain things in people that make them, more able to find their purpose? And, is it the fact that, maybe young people haven't bought a house and haven't gotten married, and so they are more free? Or are there any things that maybe people who are struggling with finding purpose could learn from a group who you find in your coaching finds purpose easier to get to that point, to learn what their purpose is? Does that make sense?
I would say, Carl Jung said the greatest damage you can do to young people is your own unlived life. So I think the starting point is to look at yourself and see what you're modeling. And that's going to be heard more than what you say. And the second thing I would add simply is that I don't coach anybody unless they have a sounding board. And a sounding board means someone who is committed listeners. So I think at any age, but the younger people today do not want to sit with a sage on the stage, so to speak. They want, what Chip Conley and Jeff call mentors, but they want people who are actually learners, and, where there's real reciprocity. And whether you call it a sounding board or not, I think for the people on this call, who are your committed listeners? Who are the people who really get you? And without a committed listener, isolation is fatal.
Great, awesome, thank you.
Kareem, I'm going to come to you momentarily. I also have some questions in the chat panel that I'd just love to raise, because they sort of seem to build on this question, and any one of the panelists can jump in on this. But do you have any idea why some people find their purpose so early on in life and others don't find it until in their 60s? It was from Karen Hegeman. Anyone have a sense as to why some people find their purpose later and some earlier?
I mean, there's a lot of layers to that one, because everybody's an experiment of one, so it depends on how they've experienced life. And most of the time that I talk about a default life versus a chosen life or good life. And the default life, often we have to live for a while and experiment till we find things. And sometimes, the default life's pretty rigid. My parents won't pay for my education in art. I had to go to business school because they wouldn't. And then eventually I get to a point where I say, I hate law. I wanted to be in. So it has to do with where we lived, how we lived, where we grew up, a lot of different factors, a lot of layers to that excellent, very excellent question.
Also, but it does speak to this idea of singularity of purpose as well, right? This idea that perhaps, I think there's a kind of a narrative where we feel like you have a purpose and that's it. And you might find it when you're young, or you might find it when you're old. And I think what we're nudging at here is that there could be a plurality of purposes. Try saying that after a drink. We could have multiple purposes in a life. We could find multiple purposes. So I want to also sort of, even if you feel like you've found your purpose, that can also be somewhat toxic, right? If that purpose is done, and you need to move on to your next purpose. So multiple purposes in a life, especially in a long life.
Absolutely. Like there's one factor that doesn't change, one thread that doesn't change, even if there's multiple purposes. And first of all, purpose is not a goal. A goal is something different than a purpose. So we have to make a distinction there. But purpose goes, in my experience, in three levels. The first level is self. We have to learn about ourselves and figure out who we are, sort of the gifts, passions, and values, and figure out our way in the world. Second, at some point, hopefully, unless we end up being serial narcissists, we learn that purpose is not about us. It's about, or not about me. It's about us. And so it's beyond myself. And ultimately, the great sages and teachers teach us that it's not just about us. It's about all of us. So purpose is who we bring to life, regardless of what the category is or the particular circumstance, but it's always beyond the self. That's the one thing that's universal. It doesn't change. It's always beyond you. That's in my point of view, that is.
I think that
Richard, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that the research shows that, Richard. I mean, I think there've been various studies that, particularly as you get to sort of over 50, that purpose beyond the self becomes even stronger. And that's across everybody, across all walks of life. So, I think it's absolutely right. Yeah.
I took a sabbatical while running a company for a year and went to a seminary and studied purpose and world religions. And science and faith agree. Purpose is part of all world religions at some level, in language differently, and most all faith traditions. So I think what you said is absolutely true.
Dr. Keltner, who runs the Greater Good Science Center, is a researcher in awe. He looks at AWE, awe, and how that impacts human beings. And there's a fascinating interface between purpose and awe. And it's this idea that as you experience awe, either through engaging with nature or music or important and profound ideas or whatever it might be that kind of makes you feel like you're in the presence of something awesome, you transcend yourself. And in transcending yourself, you're more able to find purpose. And he's actually literally done studies on this, that people who engage in awe practices, as he calls them, are more likely to find something greater than themselves. So going beyond themselves. Which probably explains your safaris, Richard.
Well, I met Abraham Maslow the year before he died, and Maslow and Frankl were at odds with each other, because Frankl said, no, it's not about self-actualization. And it's about self-transcendence. It's about actualizing for the sake of. It's like grow for the sake of giving. And just before he died, they came together. And he agreed that the top of the Maslow hierarchy is not self-actualization, it's self-transcendence. And after he died, his wife came out with the book, The Farther Reaches of Human Nature, which talked about this. And so I think what you say and what awe is about self-transcendence.
Mark, I saw you again smiling and nodding at that. Any thoughts from you on that before we go on to
Well, yeah, I mean, going back to your question, I just find that people can get caught up on it needing to be something much bigger than it is. And I like the way that various folks on the panel and others that spoke today talked about purpose in different ways, and talking about it as curiosity, talking about it as finding meaning, talking about it as contribution. And then I even broke it down even smaller as how can you be helpful? And so I think those are ways to really make it much more approachable and in bite-sized pieces. And I really like when Richard talked about how actions precede clarity. So just start seeing what it is that moves you and how does it work or not work? And then I think you'll end up somewhere where you're really feeling good and have the clarity and focus.
Alistair, quick question. Do you find that having a company purpose and a way for people to contribute through their institution can actually help fill that gap if they don't have a personal purpose?
It can do, but it needs to be genuine. This is not just about sticking a logo or a brand or a strapline above a logo or a mantra inside the walls of the organization. Individuals will very, very quickly see through that. People will judge actions much more than words. So if the leadership of the organization, and it probably does start there, can really put meaning to those words that are on a piece of paper, then yes, it will give individuals confidence, it will build trust, and it will help people move out of that rigidity that we talked about before. But it's not an easy thing to get. It's very easy to destroy, and it's much more than just words on a piece of paper.
And again, Mark, I know that this is sort of something that you know a lot about. Any thoughts before we move on?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I think that people are playing with what's important to them by finding companies that are doing things that are important to them. You know, I think at Allbirds and Everlane, where I've both worked, it's been a lot about climate. At Peloton, where I've done some work, it's around, you know, being your best self and using kind of fitness to help get you to a place of fullness. And at Airbnb, belonging was pretty broad, but I think that it's an on-road. So it's an on-ramp, and finding your way to someplace that stands for something that's important to you can be helpful on your journey towards fulfillment.
So there's this interplay between, go ahead, Richard, I'm sorry.
Well, I found in interviewing people who wanted to, they were in an orientation session, they were new employees. What do they want to know about their leader? In order to trust them and to be engaged, 3 questions. What do you stand for? What won't you stand for? And who do you stand with? And hopefully that would be aligned, Alistair, with the company purpose. But if it wasn't, it still was like, well, what do you stand for? And what won't you stand for? And who do you stand with in terms of what you really are going to support here, in terms of they knew all about their bio and where they went to school and the company values and all that. They wanted to know who you were.
Kareem, finally, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask questions. It's been an enlightening experience. Thank you to the panelists also. Something a bit more mundane is this whole issue of, as I transition out of, say, the job that I was in, into pursuing something that I believe I'm really good at, how do I ensure that, you know, the bills are paid and there's a roof over my head, and you know, how do I manage that? What thoughts do you have on that issue?
Julia, do you want to have a first run at that, seeing as you literally just burned the boat?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's critical. I mean, and everyone's going to be in a unique position, aren't they? And I think this is where it's not often just about yourself. It's about your wider family, you know, wider network as to what's going to be possible financially. Because as we know, we're all living longer, we've got, you know, more costly lives, etc. And this is where I think it's something that you do in the round. That was certainly the case for me, at looking at what makes sense from a family perspective, getting, you know, having a good conversation with you know, people who are close to you, who will be impacted by any changes you make in your financial situation. But you know what your personal balance sheet will be in terms of mortgages and, you know, other financial responsibilities, and then, you know, what's coming down the track in terms of maybe other financial responsibilities in terms of caring for family members, that kind of thing. So I think it's a matter of thinking about it holistically, and I'm sure this is where, Alistair, your expertise comes in terms of thinking about your savings and where they go. And so it's complex, and that's why it needs a lot of thought. So I think my main message would be thinking about it not just from yourself, but from a sort of a wider family and people you're close to perspective of what makes sense as you think about, you know, that next 5-10 years, combined with what is brewing up inside you in terms of what you feel will be purposeful for you at this point in life.
Avoid that paralysis though, Julia. I mean, it must have been, you have a job, you have status, you have something that you understand. How do you avoid that paralysis of like, oh gosh, if I stay just another year, or I don't have quite enough, or I need a better plan, or I need to know? Yeah,
I mean, when I was trying to be honest with myself that, you know, I've been in the legal world for 30 odd years, and I was getting this sort of deja vu sensation of, you know, I've been there before. So I said, well, right, I'm going to set a date. And it was like over a year away. It was a personal date to me that when I was going to leave. And I had a sort of what I call Project Julia. And I would do stuff every week around that to inform myself what my options would be, what the financial position would be, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was quite disciplined in a way about the preparation to avoid that. I felt, you know, the fear of leaving, you know, what was my identity? You know, I wasn't going to have all that kind of infrastructure around me. So I think if you do the upfront sort of digging and preparation and thinking, you get there and you avoid that paralysis. And there are so many, you know, people you can talk to, like Richard said, you need that sounding board, people, professionals and friends and family.
I would consider,
Richard.
Naming what Julia just said, a side hustle. I see so many people today that want to make a jump, but you know, they need purpose and a paycheck. And so a side hustle, use other people's money for a while and do a side hustle. I had a side hustle before I left a very good HR job before I jumped on to my own. The side hustle was called Lunch Hour Limited. You buy me lunch and I'll coach you. And I found out that I had such a waiting list of people, and I loved doing it. I couldn't stop. And my boss didn't think it was such a great idea, but I thought during this pandemic, there's so many people that have created side hustles. And I don't know, Kareem, if that makes sense to you, but don't jump until you've explored.
Alistair, I feel a product, a new insurance product. It's your purpose insurance. 6 months paid leave. Let's go. You and me.
Yeah.
Perfect.
401p.
I think I would just like to give a shout out, if I could, to Linda, who is in my group. And I think, Kareem, it's a brilliant question because it's the reality in this otherwise cerebral conversation. But Linda challenged back and said, there's the value of money, and there's also the value of meaning in life.
Yeah.
And there is a big heavy weight. If we can find the meaning, sometimes maybe money's not quite as important as it was before. There's something in there, the value of money and the value of meaning. It's not going to put food on the table, meaning on its own, but there's a different way of thinking about this conversation. So thank you to Linda for raising that point.
Well, and to some extent, this is why in all the times I've been able to influence at the companies I've been working, to give employees an opportunity to volunteer. It gives them such more meaning in their life, and they feel more connected to the company. And it gives them the start of thinking about this and then doing, and then it can be an evolution. So
a bridge to that next purpose. Yeah. On that note, I'm so sorry. I know we could go on. I have half a dozen questions and questioners. I'm really sorry, Cullen, that we weren't able to get to you, but I know that Mebs wants to close us out on time and in good shape. So with that, thank you to our 4 speakers, panelists. You were a joy and a wonderful engaged audience. I really appreciate you all. Thank you. Thank you for spending the morning